guess they move you here, right?
I'm going to stand up the whole time. I'm going to stand up the whole time. Whether I'm going to look at you behind the flag or in front of the flag. Right, yeah. I would like you to sit. Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Leave No One Behind plenary session. It's extremely nice to see you here. It is an honour and a pleasure to lead this very important plenary. My name is Judith Randall from Development Initiatives. We're a small organisation, an independent organisation that works at the point where access to information meets poverty eradication. I'm quite nervous, I have to tell you, this afternoon, and well, I should be, because not only are there a lot of you in the audience who've given up 90 minutes of your day to seriously think about this issue, but we also have a very interesting and very eminent panel of people who have thought seriously about what they want to say to you. There's an unstoppable logic around the Leave No One Behind agenda. If you want to know who's left behind, you have to count people. You have to have population data if you want to know who is missing. National averages won't tell you, by definition, who is left out of progress. And you have to have disaggregated data to know who's been included and who hasn't. There are two themes that I think you'll feel come constantly back into the discussion today. One is inclusion, and one is identity. Inclusion is really the new agenda for the SDGs, that the goals are not met unless they're met for everyone, that we have to get to zero on extreme poverty. And there's a recognition in the SDGs about the importance of people's identities in often holding them back from being able to take up opportunity and make progress. So I'm just going to tell you how we're going to run this session, because as you can see, it's slightly complex with all my colleagues and friends on the panel here. In the first 20 minutes or so, we want to talk about the building blocks for data to leave no one behind, because this new agenda sets real demands on those of you sitting there who will have to go back to your offices and think about how you do this. So what are the building blocks? What are the infrastructures that we need here? On the second 20-minute or so block, we're going to look at disaggregation and identity, data about the whole person, not just about a series of vulnerable groups. And then in the third session, we're going to talk about the vision, about how we get there, about the milestones. Because we don't only need to have the techniques, we have to have the leadership, we have to have the investment, and we have to have the energy. Now, while we're having the discussion and you're hearing the panelists, we'd like you to do two things. To seriously think about what you're going to do when you get home. Not in the sense of putting your feet up, but in the sense of what's the email you're going to write? What's the conversation you're going to start? Many of you, I'm sure, will have to do a report on this meeting. What are you going to say? And the second point is, we'd like to see real political energy around this agenda. We think there is that energy now, but to keep it going for the next 14 years is going to be a big challenge. So we need politicians to champion this issue. So while you're sitting there, think about who you know, who you think might champion this issue. Maybe somebody young and energetic and new to politics, maybe somebody who's committed to this agenda for a long time. Write their name on your business card and leave it on the table outside as you leave. And if you're interested in following up any of the issues here, similarly, leave your card for us and we'll get back in touch with you. So let me now introduce the first of the building blocks. So the first person who's going to speak this afternoon, and each of these presentations will be around 5 minutes. I've said to everybody that I'm not very skilled at keeping people to time, so I'm sure all of them are very skilled at keeping to time. The first speaker is John Pullinger. John is the UK national statistician, and he's the head of the Government Statistical Service. His role is safeguarding and production and publication of high quality, a term we've heard a lot in the conference, high quality official statistics by all UK government departments, and mobilising the power of data to help Britain and the rest of the world make better decisions. He's the head of the UK delegation here, and he's going to talk about counting people to make sure people count. John.
Thank you, Judith. When our presidents and prime ministers gathered in New York in September 2015, they painted a picture of a future world. A future world where no one is left behind. They'd come to that picture through years of discussion and negotiation across all parts of the world, all regions of the world, all cultures and nationalities. There were no data involved. They were making an emotional appeal to the world, almost a moral appeal. I think it's useful for us to remember that. But not only did they make that emotional appeal, they also turned on their analytical brains as well. And they asked the question, how will we know when we have been successful? And how will we decide the priority and the sequence of what to do? And they turned to us, the global data community, to give them that rational part of the answer. And that's what I hope we can focus on today. But we want to focus on that, remembering that we, as analysts, need also to engage our emotional side. We need to connect with the agendas of our own governments and their own citizens. And that's where I want to start. So in the UK, DFID, representing the government, has concluded that its interpretation of this global agenda is that because every person counts, every person must be counted. And because we're talking about fair opportunity, we need to reach everyone, whoever and wherever they are. And because our agenda is about leaving no one behind, we should start with those who are furthest away and give them priority. So there are three elements of what the British government is looking at: to understand, to empower, and to include. And at the heart of each of those is this slightly clunky word called disaggregation. I prefer to think of it as the people dimension. We are talking about individual human beings here. So I'll give you three examples. First, in the area of understanding. In Britain, we know the population is going to age very rapidly, very quickly. Do we know enough about what it's like to be old in Britain, particularly if you are very old? We are producing new numbers using new sources to answer that question. One element of the who. On the where, we know that there are different experiences in different communities. And just before Christmas again, using completely new, to us at least, administrative data sources, we produced the first time census-type data on incomes at small area levels. Thinking about the agendas of who and where. That helps us to understand. To empower, we need to make visible what has been invisible. And two examples in that. One was mentioned this morning. Refreshing and making much more serious our estimates of unpaid work. We have demonstrated that you would add an extra 56% to UK GDP if you included the cooking and the cleaning and the caring and all of the other things that make up British society. This is a big deal, particularly when you're looking at gender issues. Also, I'm particularly proud of our teams for tackling some issues which are really critical in society, but very inherently hard to measure. Domestic violence, child sexual abuse. Just in the last few weeks, we have tackled those. We have published numbers. We have started a debate on how we can improve the evidence base. And then finally, to empower. So one of the first acts of our new Prime Minister, Theresa May, when she came into office, was to ask for an audit of racial disparities. Are different communities in Britain receiving a worse deal than some others in public services? It is clearly a data-driven enterprise, but requires us as the data community to think really laterally about how to find the information that will help inform that key political imperative. And then finally, within DFID itself, understanding whether our aid programmes are really reaching disabled people. How do you ensure that the money is reaching those people who really need their voice to be heard if they are to be included? So we seek through our actions and we demonstrate through the statistics we have created that it is possible to disaggregate in order to understand, empower and include. So I come here absolutely confident that we are in a great position to mobilise the power of data to help the world make better decisions and ensure that by 2030 no one is left behind. We have a unique opportunity to build global, national and local capacity. With the spirit in this room, I am absolutely confident we will seize it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me with this microphone? Can you hear me now? Right. Well, we will abandon that idea in that case. The next speaker we have, thank you, John, very much indeed. The next speaker is Yusuf Murwanga, who's the Director General of Statistics from Rwanda. For the past 5 years or so, Yusuf has been investing his energy in civil registration and vital statistics as a tool and a system which enables everyone to be considered and to be counted in Rwanda's programme of development, national programme of development. He's going to talk about why civil registration is needed now, not in 20 years' time, and how it links with other systems as part of our infrastructure for data to leave no one behind. Yusuf, you're welcome to speak from here or from there, whichever you prefer.
Thank you very much, Judith. Judith is right. We've been investing in civil registration in Rwanda for the last 5 or so years. And although I'll be talking about civil registration, but this applies to almost all other areas of statistics. But civil registration specifically looks to be a tough thing. Especially for many developing countries, and a long shot. And but if we do it right, civil registration has a potential to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind. If we make sure we register every kid that is born, if we make sure we put in place mechanisms to update our databases and even those people who didn't get an opportunity to be registered at birth, get registered. We can create a foundation of making sure that at least we know everyone and where they live. And civil registration is a major building block for integrating with other data sources so that we understand and possibly in detail our development challenges, but even the progress that we are making. So investing in civil registration, although it's very complicated, it's possible and very important. But unfortunately, we are not investing in civil registration. We are not investing in civil registration, just like with other statistics and data programs, claiming that it's very expensive. Normally, we statisticians, in the opening, Stefan was saying that this time the global goals have been doubled, the indicators have been doubled. My budget should be doubled. And people are laughing. It's like it shouldn't be that way. Why not? Why not? The budgets for statistics actually should be doubled and tripled. If people understand the importance of statistics and data, they should double them. I'll give you an example with civil registration. In many countries, especially in developing countries, we don't know kids that are born on a monthly basis, on an annual basis. We don't know them. But we know that we need vaccines to vaccinate them. So governments and development agencies, they invest a lot in vaccines. And what we've seen, in fact, in some cases, they buy a lot of vaccines that are not needed because they base their decisions on guesswork and they just assume there are so many kids and they buy vaccines, but vaccines are very expensive and the vaccines are not needed and a lot of resources are wasted. Sometimes they don't buy enough vaccines and so many children go unvaccinated. In some cases, they buy adequate vaccines, but they don't know where these kids are, and they fail to distribute the vaccines. So they waste a lot of resources. They compromise the lives of almost everyone. And in fact, the development that they aim to achieve is actually compromised. We don't get results. And all in the name of saying that these things are very expensive and we don't have money to invest in the statistics. Although I'm saying civil registration, this applies in education. We see a lot of investment in education. We don't see enough investment in education statistics. We see a lot of investment in agriculture. We don't see enough investment in agriculture statistics. And the list is long. And no wonder we are not making progress. So I think it's very important that we get this message right. Unfortunately, something that needs to be corrected in the future. In forums like this ones, policymakers, those people that are in charge of budgets and everything should be here. And this problem is not at country level alone, especially developing countries, no. It's at government levels, it's at international organizations, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Testimony, Stefan was wondering whether his budget can be doubled. So I think and I believe that investing in statistics is very wise. Not investing in statistics and data is even more expensive. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was an extremely eloquent exposition of why investing in data and investing in statistics is an investment in achieving development. It is not an administrative cost. Thank you very much indeed. The next speaker is Haishan Fu, Director of the World Bank's Development Data Group, a long-term active leader on data and statistics that empower the development process, as our other two speakers have been talking about. She served, as I'm sure you know, on the Secretary-General's in-depth expert group on the data revolution, and she co-chairs the global strategy to improve agriculture and rural statistics, as well as having been chief of stats at the Human Development Report Office. And I think she's going to talk a little bit about the institutional building blocks that we need. Haishan.
Thank you very much, Judith. I did feel compelled to share to share one slide. I don't know
Yes.
whether we have it.
Ah, right. Not in the right order. So
That's okay. It's a
let's
photo.
hope that
Sorry
our colleagues can get that one up. So
All right. If you don't have it, it's all right. Okay.
there we go. Lovely.
So,
Thank you very much.
for those of you who might not have had the time last night between the dinner meetings or when you hit the sack, you might have missed this piece of news released by BBC yesterday. But you might be very familiar with this very famous face. A 10-year-old Afghan refugees in 1985 graced this cover of National Geographic. Since then, for 35 years, she had lived as a refugee in a neighboring country without legal identification. And recently, in order for her children to get the access to schooling and also to sell her house, she illegally obtained a fake ID and got arrested and jailed and deported. So this is her face, and she's really living in fear, but at the same time with hope that some help will come her way. So with this news, I really want to be thankful for this new 2013 agenda, which share the same moral, political, and development underpinning imperatives as the World Bank twin goals, which is to eradicate poverty and foster shared prosperity. And I'm also very grateful for Judith for organizing this session to address how we can really ensure leaving no one behind in our way forward, and highlighting the inseparable linkages between data and people and individual and statistics. I would like just to share 3 quick thoughts. One, in order to get the right data and use the right data to support this development agenda, we must recognize this is not a statistical pursuit, but rather it's a pursuit of rights, and it is also a pursuit of really making our government institutions efficient and accountable. This discussion actually reminded me some years ago when I was still working in Asia and Pacific at Regional Commission. The countries were preparing to launch another new decade for the people with disabilities. And the tagline then is, "Make the right real." But when we, as statisticians, to be asked to provide the baseline statistic of how many people really are living with disability and what their needs are, we realize how little we know because we really don't have the right measurement and right data. So therefore, I suggested another tagline, which is count everyone right to make the right real. At the same time, we were also looking into how to improve the basic demographic population statistics. Therefore, we will have some very fundamental information will allow us to look at our development and look at our population groups in the disaggregated way as possible. So the issue of improving vital statistics came on top on our agenda. But very quickly we realized it's really about improving civil registration and vital statistics at the same time. But in order to do so, it's really about linking up to other development agendas, because this is not a statistical pursuit, but a broader development pursuit. And that's why in the region we developed a very broad partnership linking NGOs, like Plan and World Vision, to UNHCR, to UNICEF, to UN Women, and national governments to really push for this as a development agenda, as a priority for us to go forward. I'm really glad now improving CRVS has become a global movement. This reminds me, or link to my next point, that is, in order to have the right data and use the right data to guide our achievement towards the 2013 goals and leaving no one behind, we really need the right statistical architecture. This is not just about short-term needs and responses and having some incremental changes, but rather to set our ambitions high and define a clear vision of what kind of data systems we want. And here I really want to stress the need, while we're still trying to improve the government statistical system as the way we're doing our data collection and data dissemination use by integrating new technologies, we must also realize there will be no real data revolution for the 2030 agenda if we don't really have, with the technology available, to have digitized government government administrative systems and registration systems, to have universal mobile access as a basic right, and also to collectively invest in geospatial information and its applications, and allowing us to integrate those different type of data together so that we will have the clarity and precision of the kind of information we need, not only to monitor the achievement of the SDGs, but also to guide us at different level our actions and programs. Therefore, it's very important for us not to advocate for investing in statistics as a separate standalone development initiative, but link up to the investment in other areas. I think this is why the World Bank has taken on CRVS as a broad alliance across our different programs, thematic programs, and also pursuing ID4Ds with the lead from ICT, global practice, but linking up to governance, to gender, to poverty eradication, and so on and so forth. My next issue is that whatever we generate, we have to make the data available. So I want to make a pitch again for us to work together to promote open data, and at the same time to make microdata available. Yesterday, at the open data session I was chairing, I asked the panelists what their wish would be for what we will make the most progress over the next 2 years before we come back to the second World Data Forum. And one of them said, I'd love to see a new set of guidelines helping us to release microdata, protecting the confidentiality as desired, but allow us to really have much wider access and use of this kind of data in order to really help us address the issue of leaving no one behind. That is my wish too, but I hope it will not stay as a wish, but with our joint effort, we'll have this as a reality. Thank you very much.
I told you were going to get a stellar line of contributors. Thank you very much, Haishan. If the data people could put the Data Must Speak presentation up next, I'd like to introduce Bupa Musonda, who's Head of Statistics in the Ministry of Education in Zambia. He is going to look at the challenges and requirements for data to leave no one behind in education, and in particular the Education Must Speak programme. He's also the National Research Coordinator for the Southern Africa Consortium on Measuring Education. Bupa, do you want to speak from there or from here? I'll give you the... No. Sorry, could we have the Data Must Speak presentation, please? That's it. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you greetings from the Honorable Minister of General Education in Zambia, who should have been here to speak to you. I would like to share the initiative that we are working on in the Ministry of Education, which we are calling Data Must Speak. This is an initiative we are working in collaboration with the UNICEF. It's an initiative meant to raise the usage of data. As a ministry, we conduct the annual school census every year and we collect huge amounts of data. But we have realized that the utilization or usage of data is quite low. And as a result of that, we are working on improving the utilization of data at all the levels of education so that people have evidence-based decision-making and they can use that data for planning and also for projections. Yeah, like I've mentioned, the Data Must Speak initiative is an information feedback system and tools for increasing accountability. And accountability at all the levels of education, that is at province, district, and school level, including the community. So when we collect data, most of the times we don't provide feedback to where the information is coming from, especially from the schools. So as a result of that gap, we have developed, in collaboration with UNICEF, the school profiles. We have also developed the provincial profiles, the district profiles, and including the community profiles, as well feedback to where the data is coming from. And these school profiles are a summary. It's a two-page document of key selected indicators for the school, as well feedback, and also for the province and district, the same. And the school profiles, we want these tools to help schools to improve school planning, also to monitor performance and the learning outcomes, leaving no one behind. And the process has been very consultative and participatory, where we have involved the provincial, district, school managers, including the communities themselves. We have interacted with them, provided the draft profiles, they have made comments, and we've gone back to the school head teachers to get feedback once we provided the school profiles to them, and we've received the tremendous positive response. So this is a sample of the school profile. It has some summarized information, like I've mentioned, which include learner outcomes, which is disaggregated. We have shown a trends of school performance in terms of examinations for the past 3 years. So a school is able to check the trend in terms of performance when it comes to examinations. And you can see whether, as a head teacher, the trend is positive or negative. As a good head teacher, I would like to see a positive trend. So if it's a negative trend, then that's homework for myself as a head teacher, to go and interrogate and see areas of concern to change the trend so that it is positive. So that too will give the head teacher some insight of where the weaknesses are and where to concentrate so that the school can perform better. So we have indicators such as vulnerability indicators. We have number of teachers, pupil-teacher ratio, book-pupil ratio, and also the resources available in the school. We have tried to make it quite simple with clear messages to support interpretation headline results. And also there's a comparison of the school in relation to the district, province, and national, and also provided the averages and the national standards as a way of comparing whether the school is below or above the national standards which we have set as a country. So in addition to the school profile, we have also produced the provincial district, including the community. We don't want to leave anyone behind. So we've developed a community profile as a way of accountability. The schools have to be accountable to the community they are serving. So we have a community profile which show the learning outcomes of the schools, the enrollment, the dropouts, and other indicators, whereby the communities, once they look at the performance of that school in that community profile, they can interrogate their teacher and to ask questions to say as to why our school is not performing and what is it that we can do to support you and your team as a community so that we can improve the results of our school. So this too is supporting creation of school improvement plans, because once head teachers have that information for the school, they're able to identify areas of concern, areas where they need to do some work, so that feeds into the school planning improvement plans for the school. Similarly, for the district standards officers who go to the schools to monitor, with the school profiles, they're able to identify which schools are weak, which schools need support. So they have targeted monitoring, knowing which schools they are visiting and knowing what areas of support those schools will require, which they have admitted to be cost-effective and quite effective because they are going to schools that need support rather than randomly picking schools and do some monitoring. So, and the profiles support or promote resource allocation based on identified needs. From the school profiles, the teachers are able to see the needs that are priority for the school. And also, it helps in prioritizing of the under-supported schools. So with that information on the profiles, it can allow for planning whereby you can prioritize knowing which school is badly hit or which school is poorly resourced. So it provides an avenue for effective planning and the resource allocation, which is effective. I think my 5 minutes are up. I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So those are some of the infrastructural issues and the issues about point of use, using this data at different points of use, community level, school level, district level, etc., in order to drive change. Now, I'm going to try this microphone again. Does it still not work? It's okay, good. So in the opening session on Sunday afternoon, Ambassador Wu Hongbo I thought was very interesting, and I thought that two things I noticed. He kept on emphasizing the word focus, timely, reliable, etc., but focus came out very strongly. And the other thing he said was, you may be happy with data on poverty numbers in order to analyze, but if you want to help people, you have to have disaggregated data. And John, interestingly, referred to disaggregated data as data about people. So in this next section, we want to talk a little bit about data about people and not simply about vulnerable groups. So the first person who's going to be thinking about this and talking about this is Patricia Conboy, who's head of policy at HelpAge International. And HelpAge International, I expect you know them, they have a network of organizations all around the world. They've been bringing data on aging to the policy arena for a very long time, for decades. So what have you actually learnt about data that can ensure older people in particular are not left behind?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll begin by saying that I am not my age. So my age is part of who I am, excuse me, an important part, but not all of it. And interestingly enough, I think policies, services, and very often data sets deal with parts of us and bits of us, but in actual fact, we are complex human beings. Excuse me. So we talk about the need for data on age, on disability, on gender, but the reality is that all of these issues are intersecting in our lives. And I think that these intersections and these multiple identities are actually a challenge for the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of the indicators, in terms of the targets, and indeed of the measures. So I want to make 2 points flowing from that. And as Judith has said, indeed, HelpAge has been advocating throughout the SDG process for the naming of older people, for the counting of older people, for the visibility of older people in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think what the process is showing to us is that we actually need a life course approach to setting of targets and to the measuring of those targets across our data systems, within which we can integrate data about different aspects of people's lives within whatever age band. So let me give one specific example. If we think of indicator, or target I should say, 5.2, which relates to violence against women. And it is excellent that violence against women is being highlighted as an issue at the moment. But looking at it from an age perspective, we have a concern that the data may not be there to measure at the moment because of age caps on surveys and lack of data to actually measure what happens to older women in terms of their experience of violence. And the other dimension that concerns us is that in terms of elder abuse, men as well as women in later life are experiencing elder abuse, and we need to know more about that to intervene and manage and ensure that it's reduced. Let me go on to my second point. We'd like to use the data we have to make better use of that data. So, being really practical in terms of this point about the complexity of ourselves as human beings, we cannot continue, and I'm delighted to hear some of the things John Pullinger has already said about the ONS in Britain, we cannot continue to produce data about the older age group as 65 plus, as if everybody between 65 and 90 or 100 can literally be lumped together, all being the same, and without a life course journey between 65 and 90 in just the same way that we have a journey through the earlier stages of our lives. National statistical offices are collecting data for surveys, and much of that data could be better released and provide greater insight to us in terms of the diversity and heterogeneity of older people's lives and of all our lives if it were better disaggregated. So that is something that we would like to see happen in terms of providing us with information across disability, across gender, across ethnicity, but also in terms of the domains that matter to older people, including income, participation, work, care, many others. To help us with that, HelpAge is participating with DFID and with a number of the multilateral agencies, and we're inviting others to join us in terms of actually working towards the establishment of a city group on ageing under the UN statistical system. This is something we would like to see to help bring about a standardization in relation to some of those issues around disaggregation of age data. So that's what I'll say by way of opening remarks. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. Musharraf Hossain here is Head of Research and Policy at Action on Disability and Development. He too has been working on these issues, I think his whole life actually. The SDGs are much, much stronger on disabilities than the MDGs were, which wouldn't be difficult. So what do you want to happen now? You've got the policy environment. What do you actually want to happen on data on persons with disabilities?
Thank you very much. Whenever I go to the policymakers or other stakeholders, people ask how many disabled people are there. So the number matters for us. And data empower people with disabilities. Traditionally, when count disabled people, the statistical office used binary question. Do you have a disability or not? It is a zero-sum game. A person without disabilities has everything: education, employment, family, dignity, rights, whatever they want. But when people are with disability like me, they have nothing. They're not admitted into school, they don't get jobs, they don't have dignity. So when enumerators go to the house and ask, are you a disabled person? With the word disability, there is a social stigma. And people say, no, I'm not a disabled. They hide themselves. And at the end, what we get, that is below 1% of total population are disabled. In Bangladesh, in the census of 1991, it shows 0.5%. In census of 2001, it shows 0.75%. Even in 2011, it shows 1.75%. So with these figures, the policymakers don't care. It's a so small number. And with the disabled people cannot raise our voice because we are not organized. So these are such kind of traditional questions did not focus the reality on the ground. But WHO says 15% of any populations are people with disabilities. So now there is a standard set of questions developed by Washington Group. It is much more empowering. It does not focus our disability, it focuses our ability. And they ask, for example, physical disability. So they ask, do you have difficulty in walking? Yes, I have difficulty. But it does not mean I cannot go to school, I cannot complete my education, I should not have family. So it is much more empowering. And through that question, when it is used, it gets 10%, 12%, in some places 22%. But even that is not the aim. In census of 2011 or even 2014 National Disability Survey, we use these questions. But when the enumerator went to ask this question, they again went to ask this first question. They said, are you disabled? Then they asked these difficulty questions. And we did not get the figure. So question is not enough. I think definition of disability is very important. And the people who are collecting data and the institution who is using this disability. I think National Statistical Office should carry out all this survey so that the real picture should come. And now, in the National Household Survey, it shows 9% of total population are disabled. I think that is much more representative. I think we need to work more so that we can get the real picture of disabled people who are in the society. And if we don't count them, then we miss the benefit of Sustainable Development Goal. In MDG, disabled people are not included. So disabled people did not allowed or they did not get education, they did not get employment. But sustainable development is a political commitment. And the 193 countries' heads came and committed, that is, leave no one behind. And there is some ambitious target, zero unemployment, zero poverty, employment, education for all. If you want to achieve those things, then everybody have to count in. And a goal will be achieved if it is for everyone. So if we don't count disabled people, then there is an opportunity that many people will be missing. And for doing that, and even the number is not enough, I think it has to be reliable and it has to be disaggregated. If we get the disaggregated data of every country and even in the community, then service providers can ensure that it reaches to individual.
Thank you very much, Musharraf. I think if we'd been, sorry. Thank you. Sorry. I think if we'd been having this session 5 or 10 years ago, we would have had conversations about groups of people in a particular classification. We wouldn't have had this discussion about multiple identities. So I think things have already moved on, and the demands on data are therefore different. Sofia Garcia is the UN representative for SOS Children's Villages International. So you work with children whose family networks are either very frail or non-existent, with consequences for whether those children are counted and whether they're included in opportunity. Tell us about what you've learned.
I will build actually on the two previous answers and precisely on the aspect of multidimensionality and several identities and reasons for disadvantage. Children are a group at the other side of the age spectrum, are a group that is generally uncounted, but I'm going to focus on a group of children that are not only uncounted, that we are not counting, but we don't know that we are not counting. If we are calling this a revolution is about creating new system and not only improving what we have. And our first point is that if we are to leave no one behind, we not only have to improve the data collection systems and better use what we have, but we need to proactively search and identify those that we are not even aware that we are not reaching to. It's that first point of identification of what groups we are leaving behind. And I think children without parental care and at risk of losing it is one of these groups neglected by data. There is an estimation that this group is composed by 200 million people, 200 million children that live without either of their parents. But I say it is an estimate because there is no official number or no official figure. Despite governments have not only signed Agenda 2030, but the CRC, virtually all governments have committed to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which puts them in which gives them the direct responsibility of the protection and care of these children. If I'm a mother of I don't know how many children, it will be very difficult to care for them. We need to know how many we are responsible for to be able to provide for them. To raise awareness on this topic, if you allow me for a second, we started a campaign in collaboration with Lumos under the title All Children Count, but Not All Children Are Counted, that has been supported by more than 250 organizations. And maybe something to remark is that these 250 organizations are equally from the north and from the south, or developed and developing countries, because that data doesn't exist in any country. It is a universal problem and a universal lack of data, and I think this reflects very well or corresponds very well with the universality of the agenda. A question that we face often is, why would we need to tackle this group? And why to focus on living desegregation by living arrangement or care status if there is so many other things to care for? And this forum is the clear example that we have a lot of work to do. Apart from the moral obligation to count everybody and the commitment to leave no one behind, data is not an end in itself. Data is a tool, and data is a tool to inform policies that will cause impact in the life of people in the most effective way. And to do it in the most effective way, we need to identify the markers of disadvantage. And loss of parental care is one of the markers of disadvantage for the child and the future adult that this child will become. A recent study by UNICEF, and we have a colleague here, showed that they were measuring the determinants of childhood vulnerability, and this study shows that children without parental care, children that don't live with their parents, fare worse in every aspect of life compared to their peers. This means loss of parental care has an impact in every of the goals. So tackling this group specifically, measuring, knowing what they need, we will know the root of many of the things that make us succeed or fail in the different goals. We have heard the case of vaccines. We can have vaccines if we don't know where they are because they are not in the household. These vaccines are not reaching to these children, and the same applies for education and so many others. So in some, children without parental care is one of those farthest behind children because they are in the blind spot, the farthest from the farthest behind children, and the children and the people that Agenda 2030 call us to work for through data and through policy. It's a matter of knowing how many they are, and where they are, and what brought them to that situation, and then we will be able to do policy to prevent and to succeed in the SDGs implementation.
Thank you very much indeed, Sophia. Francis Kariuki, Chief Francis Kariuki, is known as the tweeting chief, so you can look that up. He's a government officer representing the president in Lanet district in Kenya, working with the community on the 5 SDGs that mean most to them. So what I'd like to ask you, Francis, is about how this data looks when you look at it from the perspective of a whole community, not from individuals in particular groups, but when we're talking about, as somebody said early on, the whole person. Francis.
Thank you very much. First of all, to say why they call me the tweeting chief, is that we've been using Twitter to keep the community safe. If you have time, you can Google on how tweeting through SMS, and you're going to get why we're able to get the people who do not even have the smartphone, and we will be able to keep them safe. And what happened is that in 2014, I was invited to Tanzania, an open data forum, to speak about my story on the use of Twitter for community policing. And that's where place I learned about SDG. And when I went back home, I studied all the SDGs, the 17 of them. We have a system in Kenya, what we call Nyumba Kumi, which is an acronym borrowed from Tanzania, meaning about 10 houses. But in Kenya, it's different. We have people maybe living in one block or people living in one estate. Those people sit down and elect their leaders. And why they elect them was just the system of sharing information, because, you know, Kenya had been attacked by terrorists severally. So we came together on how to collect information and to know your neighbor, to neighborhood watch, in order to be able to keep ourselves safe. So when I looked at the activities of Nyumba Kumi and all the SDG, they are the same. Only we needed to align them in a structured manner that could be understood. This is about poverty, this is about education, like that. But there are so many activities that are similar. So I saw an opportunity there where we could use the community to collect data about SDGs. What we did is that we collected data, we used the questionnaires, and we used these cluster leaders, because one thing, they are trusted by the community because it's the community who elected them. So they can volunteer all the information they needed. And after collecting the data, is then we discovered that as per 2009 census, Lanet Umoja, where I'm in charge as a government officer, there were 7,500 households. But after the collection of data, we discovered that there were more than that. There were 12,000 households. Then we saw that the population read then 29,000, but we discovered that there are 50,000. The population is 50,000. So you see, we are making decisions based on 9 years old data. But now, after the collection of data from people, we discovered that we needed to seek more help to help our people. And out of this data, people benefited a lot in a big way, because we are able to share the same information about the problems concerning water. We shared with one organization called Start With One Kenya, and they were able to give 12,000 water filters. So we can say in Lanet Umoja, in the first year, we were able to achieve goal number 6, in the sense that we are able to have clean water per every household. We might not have full access to water, but the water that comes to the household is cleaned, which is quite a milestone for us, because now the kids can go to school, they are healthy. People can go to work because they are healthy. The money used to spend on issues of waterborne diseases, because it was a big issue in my area. It was reduced. At the same time, crime also went down by 90%. So after that, we gathered all these leaders. I have 300 leaders in the whole, what we call location, what we call here a region. My region is divided into 3 sub-regions. So I picked 300 leaders from every sub-location. And from there, we set them down and we trained them about data collection. We trained them about SDGs. We talked about the 17 goals. Then they themselves picked 5 goals that they thought it was important to look at. That goal on no poverty, on education, gender, health, and water. So we have, for water now, we're not thinking about so hard, but now we are collecting data on gender, and that's what we are doing for now. Then that's it for now. Maybe I'll talk later.
Thank you very much indeed, Francis. Thank you. Because we started late, we're a little bit pushed for time. So we were going to have a more general discussion about the systemic things that needed to change. And I was also going to put my colleagues on the spot by saying, what's the acid test for you? What's the acid test and what's the milestone for achieving the change we need? Perhaps you'd like to think about that too. And we'll come back to the questions session at the end. So the last block here on data to leave no one behind, counting people to make people count, is about the driving ideas, is about getting politicians involved, is about leadership, is about vision, is about investment. So we've got 3 speakers under this section. The first is Tony German from Development Initiatives, who's going to talk about the P20 initiative, a political project which is designed to help politicians focus on people who are left behind. I don't know if you want to speak from there or from here.
Sure, I'll speak from here. Thank you.
I think you need the clicker. And lovely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I think if we're going to succeed with the data revolution in terms of leaving no one behind, we're going to need to communicate. We're going to need to communicate to the public, and we're going to need to communicate to politicians. And the P20 is the way that we've chosen to try and communicate progress, or lack of progress, over the next 15 years. If you look at the first chart, I've got a few charts. You see the headline is that we're talking about prosperity, inequality, and the poorest 20%. It's the poorest 20% that we're focused on, what we're calling the P20, and how we can bridge the data and understanding gaps. Now, if you look at the chart there, it's a very simple one. There are two lines on it. You need to look at the bottom line, which is red, and the other line, which is blue. The bottom line is the P20, the poorest 20% of people in the world, and the blue line is the rest of us. And what the chart shows is that over the period since the MDGs were agreed in 2000, between then and 2012, the gap in incomes between the 80% of us who are not in the P20 and the P20 has continued to grow. So all of the talk about pro-poor growth, inclusive growth, broad-based growth, and that's the reality that we get from the statistics, which is that people are continuing to be left behind. So that is the essential gap that we need to change. That's the direction of travel that we need to go in. If I can work out which button I press. Okay, that button. Sorry, not that button. Clearly, we need better data and better analysis. If you look at this chart, just a couple of facts about the P20. First of all, obviously, 20% of people in the world, they enjoy only 1% of the world's growth at the moment. They represent 44% of cases of child stunting. Now, stunting is a one-way street. You don't get better from stunting. It's something that's going to be with you for your whole life, and you very probably are going to hand on to the next generation. So that's a pretty key statistic. And the last statistic I've got there relates to what my colleagues have said about unregistered births. 55% of people born into the poorest 20% of people on the planet don't have their births registered. So those are some very bold statistics. The idea of the P20 is a political concept, as Judith said, and it's to try and focus political attention on the 20% of people most likely to be left behind, most likely to be excluded. And the idea is applicable globally. That's our first focus, but it's also an idea which is applicable in every country. What we're going to do with the P20 is we're going to consistently advocate for data, and our little acronym is QGAD, data that's disaggregated by quintile, so we know what's happening to each of the 20 different 20%. We're going to advocate for data to be disaggregated by gender, by geography, so we know where people are, by age, and by disability for obvious reasons. For us, those disaggregations are the absolute basic, given that most people have got multiple identities, but those are the ones that are, as it were, our top-line asks in terms of the priorities for disaggregated data. The other advantage we feel about the idea of the P20 is that it provides a vocabulary and an intuitive measure that can be used both for the goal of eliminating dollar-a-day poverty or extreme poverty, or however you want to call it, but it's an idea that is lasting because it also takes into account the fact that in every society, as well as ending poverty, we have to make sure that people don't fall too far behind, so that the poorest 20% are always in people's minds. So we would hope that, for example, when people go along to the G20, what's going to be in their minds is, what's the G20 going to do in terms of its consideration of the well-being of the global P20? Okay, so the next slide. Our Prime Minister went to India recently on a visit, and the press coverage in the Financial Times contained a line which said, the income of the poorest 20% of people in India has been growing at 3 times the rate of the top quintile. Now, the snag with that sort of soundbite is that politicians will hear that. They'll hear the phrase, the incomes of the poorest 20% are growing at 3 times the rate of other people, and they'll think, that's fine then, growth will solve the problem. The problem is, though, that it won't. If you look at the chart here, this is the growth of, within India, of the poorest 20% and the rest. The same chart that we saw earlier, and you'll notice the pattern is the same. And so the problem is we have to be very careful how we use data so that people don't take the wrong conclusions from it. And the overwhelming point is that however many countries you look at, you're generally finding that the gap between the poorest 20% and everybody else is continuing to grow. That's the gap we need to close. Now, on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see my colleagues tell me who know about data, this is how we currently measure maternal mortality. It's a complex algorithm which I don't even begin to understand. Anything with a bit of algebra in it, and I just turn off. But at the moment, the data is telling us the prevalence, but that's not good if you're trying to get resources to real people. The people on the right-hand slide with the placards pointing out how many people in Uganda, how many women are dying in childbirth, they know the real people. And that's the challenge to the data community. We need to both use the puckered data, the highly respected data, the data that's been collected for years and is validated, and we need to somehow combine that with community-level data, which is real-time and real people. And that's a big challenge for the data community, but it's one that I think we can deliver on for the P20. Two last points. First one, in the UK we have a supermarket called Asda, which is part of the Walmart group. And I noticed recently that they had also applied, they didn't use the term P20, but they'd also looked at their customers divided by income quintile. And the chart there shows how from the left-hand bottom lowest column is the year-on-year growth in the incomes of Asda customers by quintile. So, in other words, the incomes of the poorest 20% of Asda customers have grown more slowly than this isn't actually a thing to tell me to shut up, but so the incomes of the Asda shoppers in the UK are growing more slowly than the other quintiles. So again, we see the same pattern, and the chart above it is from, I think, John's organisation, Office of National Statistics, and again, you see the lowest line, the blue line on the chart, is again the income growth of the poorest quintile in the UK. Again, it's at the bottom, and it's not keeping pace with the rest. Those are the things that we need to change, and we think that with a focus on the P20, on the intuitive idea of this is the shorthand we need to focus people's attentions, not on GNI, which hides the disaggregations which show how real poor people are developing. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I leave you with some quotes about the importance of data and how we can use data to transform the life chances of the poorest 20%. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is actually a lost phone, so if you recognise it, please come up and claim it. Those of you who've been around a long time will probably remember State of the World's Children being released, I think probably in the late 1970s or mid-1970s by Richard Jolly. It was released to get action on children. It was also a great source of data. So Klaus Johansson from UNICEF is going to talk a little bit about data to action.
Thank you very much, Judith. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I wanted to bring us back out to sort of how do we actually think that data will help ensure that we leave no one behind, right? Because we're not talking about data for data's sake. We're actually hoping that this will make us take action to change things, right? And I think it's very important in that we conceptualize this properly. So first of all, we need the data to monitor how we're doing, to establish a baseline, and to ensure that we can have effective advocacy for those groups that are currently left behind. So working with the Washington group on proper disability data, working on thinking about new techniques to measure children out of the household, or working with geospatial techniques to get more granular spatial data are very important for this purpose, right? And this is something that we're very interested in, we're investing in, and that's very, very important as we move into the SDG era. But having this data doesn't on its own do anything to address the challenges, right? And we think it's important that we remember we need a different kind of data as well. And I think perhaps rather than combining them, we think about different data for different purposes. So we have monitoring and advocacy, and that's extremely important. It's going to be fundamental from now to 2030. But we also need data to drive action, right? And I think the example we saw from Zambia is one important example of that, right? Where it's about helping governments improve on their service delivery by having data that's perhaps from an administrative system, real-time feedback from the community, and other kinds of data. And it actually works within the government to help them improve their service delivery. And that's another area we think is very important to invest in. And the third is actually to have social accountability, so that the communities themselves are empowered to take this into their own hands, to demand better services from the government, understanding how the drivers of leaving no one behind work in their community and being able to perhaps change the community themselves. So sometimes I think these three are a bit confused, right? We need to make sure that we're clear on which of these purposes we're investing in data for, and make sure that we use all three of these levels and invest in the different systems needed at these different levels. So we need both investment in household surveys, refining them, including some of these new developments into better targeting certain groups, into administrative systems, but also into other community level initiatives. And I think that sometimes these are put into conflict with each other, but they're all fundamental and interrelated. So unless we have all of these three purposes of data, we're not going to be able to achieve leaving no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your serious attention during this. I appreciate it. It's a lot of speakers. We were going to break it up a little bit, but the last person to speak before we come to questions, and we were all rather assertive in coming down to the front and getting the previous session to come off. I'm not sure how assertive the next ones are going to be, but we'll carry on till we feel we have to stop. But before that, Enrico Giovannini, I would like to invite him to speak, to talk really about the level of ambition we want, to pick up perhaps on the point that he made yesterday about data as an asset. So data is often not seen as an asset. Is it seen as something you can throw away? Well, there was a survey, but we'll do another one anyway. So we really need to ensure our level of ambition is high enough, and to think about, as Yusuf was saying, how we treat the costs of data and what benefits we compare them with when we're looking at whether it's a good investment. So, Enrico, and then questions. So please be, and comments, please be thinking about what you want to say.
Thank you very much, Judith. May I ask you how many of you work in a statistical office? Please raise your hands. How many of you run in contact with a statistical office? Great. Why should this session change your life? And changing your life, you may change people's life. That is the key question. And what should you do after this session to change your and other people's life? My first job at the Italian Statistical Office in 1982 was to calculate quarterly GDP. Once you have done it, you can calculate everything. Because people don't know how much modeling is used in estimating quarterly GDP. And if we used half of the modeling used to calculate quarterly or annual GDP, we would solve most of the problems that we are talking about. Not everything, but most. But statisticians don't behave in this way. They feel that they are authorized to use the modeling when they talk about economic statistics, while when they talk about social statistics or spatial statistics and so on, they're much more prudent. Why? Because, of course, they have a lot of pressure from stakeholders, politicians, and so on, so they are afraid of going beyond averages. Averages were invented when we didn't have enough data. But today, of course, we can calculate distributions much more easily than before. But our mindset is still set in the 20th century. Look, In Europe, and I know better my continent, the discussion at the political level every June is about the country-specific recommendations to countries on their economic policies, macroeconomic policies, social policies, and so on. And of course, in June, you have the data for the first quarter of, data for GDP for the first quarter of the same year. Social indicators, for example, income distribution, 2 or 3 years behind. Isn't this distorting the whole discussion? Of course it is. But this is creating also a problem for the so-called political economy of indicators. You reduce the incentives for politicians to do the right thing, because if they have to wait years to get a sense of what that policy has produced, they will move to something easier or more rewarding in political terms. Microdata integration is the key word, of course. When I was president of the Italian Statistical Office, we integrated all the administrative records and also statistical records for each and every person, linking it to GPS and so on and so forth. So, of course, once you have done it, the discussion on no one left behind changed completely, because you can calculate a lot of stuff. Of course, there are privacy problems and so on and so forth, but this is feasible. Of course, I'm talking about a developed country, but this is where the integration of big data, open data, and so on and so forth can be extremely helpful. Now, let me just conclude with 2 points. First, yesterday, the Business and Sustainable Development Commission announced in its report, they are very big CEOs, something that is quite striking. Let me read it just for a second. The Commission will also work with others in the financial sector to create publicly available global goals league tables. This will rank corporate performance sector by sector against the relative SDGs and establish sector sustainability benchmarks. Our vision is to turn the analysis of sustainability reporting data into a publicly available resource, empowering citizens and civil society to use it. In the league tables, companies will be ranked on their performance across a range of indicators, including climate change, gender equality, supply chain, labor standards, and so on and so forth. Wow. Of course, they say it will take time to build up the right metrics and quality of data. But if they can do that, and they have been seriously studying that, this shows why the business sector is investing in SDGs and how much they can eventually invest to support statistical offices, because, and this is the key message of this report, SDGs is a huge business opportunity. So let me conclude and say why this session should change your life. I think that if you are in a statistical office, you should commit yourself to go back to your country and establish a task force on no one left behind in your institute, in your statistical system. This is not easy, I understand, but it's a commitment that you can take. And therefore, this is for those who work with statistical offices, ask chief statistician to do that. And of course, a lot of cooperation is needed, but if you leave this session with this commitment, I think that we will get closer to the solution of this fundamental problem. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Enrico. That's a pretty good challenge. People who would like to comment or like to ask a question, we should have 2 people with roving mics. Verity, who's in a bright orange dress, and I can't see her at all, and Alex, who isn't in a bright orange dress, and I can't see him either. There's Verity, right. So I'm having real difficulty looking into the light. So first of all, we'll start with this block. Anybody want to ask a question in this block or make a comment? Not that I can see. Gentlemen on the aisle here, please, halfway up. Alex is coming down to you. If you could introduce yourself, sir.
Tony Coleman, a former UK parliamentarian, one of the few here, I think, in the auditorium with no links with any statistical officers, and I hope when we meet again in 2 years' time, we will have everyone who is here again, but we'll have double the number, and the rest will be parliamentarians and local government elected councillors who can hear this message and engage with the statisticians and work on the policy-making pull-through to ensure that no one is left behind. My point I was going to make was that the key is the disaggregation of the statistics down to ward level and down to constituency level. MPs and the councillors have to get elected, and the councillors get elected in their ward by probably a majority of under 100, and certainly MPs, and I'm certainly one, get elected by majorities of less than 3,000. The number of people who have disabilities or the aged or whatever are significantly more than those sort of numbers, and it would give tremendous lobbying power to ensure that particular groups are not left behind if the statistics are disaggregated or they go down to what was said to be microdata level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was a person waving an order paper or something along that lines in the middle of that block there. So if you could find them, please. Yep.
Hi, thank you. My name is Selena Lee, and I'm from Insights to Impact. We're a resource center for improving the use of data for financial inclusion. In financial inclusion specifically, we use a lot of survey data, and I think disaggregation is relatively straightforward when using survey data. And I was wondering if the panelists have thought much about the potential need to rethink even the way we collect survey data, the way sampling is done, the way data collection is done, to really reach out into those underserved populations, as well as even rethinking about the indicators and the targets that we set. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's somebody down here, please, in the middle again.
Thank you. Emanuele Baldacci from Eurostat, the Statistical Office of the European Commission. Question for the panelists. I was particularly interested in your point of view on the data for actions, the point that was stressed by some of you, that data should be used for taking actions, for designing policies. And here, something that you have not addressed directly so far is whether we need information that is more dynamic, transitions, for example, measuring people getting into poverty, staying into poverty, how long, duration of poverty, but you can also replicate it for other dimensions of social policies, for example, transitions from unemployment to employment and so on and so forth. So is this useful, how prepared we are?
Thank you very much. I think we've probably got time. Next session doesn't start till 15:15. If the organisers are champing at the bit, please come and do so down by here so we know. But we could take maybe another couple of questions. Anybody in the block over there who would like to ask a question? It's extremely hard. It's a gentleman, or actually I can't tell, halfway up, somebody halfway up. And somebody right over there. Thank you very much. Right over there, next, Verity. So, madam.
Thank you. I'm Birgitte Feiring from the Danish Institute for Human Rights. Leaving no one behind basically reflects fundamental human rights principles, including principles that are reflected in human rights instruments to address, for example, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, women, children, etc. These instruments are legally binding, and they come with institutionalized and regular reporting and monitoring mechanisms. So my question is, how do you see the prospects of integrating data from human rights monitoring into that ecosystem of data that we are discussing here?
Thank you. And last question, just under the stand right over by the wall, please.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Khanyaro from here in South Africa, Pretoria. I would like to ask Mr. Yusuf, speaker number 2. Don't know whether he's listening, but
Yes, he's here.
I'm interested in asking him questions. In South Africa, we are having a problem of people who are crossing our borders illegally. Then we ended up counting them because they are coming here to buy identity documents illegally. So you find out that we are counting people here while they are also counting them in their countries of origin. And I wish Dr. Lehota was here. And Honorable Youssef, on behalf of Dr. Lehota, I think you can also answer this. What do you do in Rwanda to make sure that you don't count people who are crossing borders illegally to Rwanda? Then you count them, and when they go home, crossing border again without noticing that they are crossing the border, what do you do that you don't count people who are crossing borders illegally? Because at the end of the day, we ended up releasing wrong information to our people, because this is a very serious problem in Africa. People are crossing borders illegally. Then we ended up counting them, which is unacceptable. So, Honorable Youssef, may you please clarify me on that one so that we can be able to count people because this is a problem.
I think I'm going to have to ask you to conclude your question there, sir, if that's all right, because we are right up against it
Yes.
time-wise. Thank you very much indeed.
Clarify me on that one, Mr. Youssef.
Thank you. So, Yusuf, that question to you. Somebody needs to pick up the point about dynamism in the data, so I'm guessing that's probably John or Yusuf or Bupa, or Klaus. You can choose. So, I think we have about 2 minutes. If you want to take a second or two to say what your acid test is of progress, to take the liberty that I took about asking you who politically you'd like to be involved, that Enrico took in saying go back and set up a task force, feel free. We won't go around the table, just put your hand up at the table if you have a point you want to make, but first I'm going to go to Yusuf.
Thank you very much. I'll say 2 things about counting people that cross illegally. First of all, as statisticians, we have to count everyone, including those that cross illegally, because there's a social and demographic dynamic that we have to capture. But when we capture them, depending on which tools we are using and which surveys we are doing, we can know where they're coming from. We can know where they're coming from so that policymakers can do something about it. Another thing is this business of counting people and registering people and everything. It has to be a multinational effort. All countries should be counting their people and making sure they have proper identity for all these people. And when countries share this information, we understand better who these people are. And those misunderstandings and everything can be dealt with. Thank you very much.
Thank you. John, do you want to take up Mr. Baldacci's point about dynamics?
Yes, I mean, the simple answer is yes, we do. I think transitions are essential, particularly when you're talking about statistic data taking action. I mean, I can integrate the answer to some of the other questions. I mean, the constituency dimension is one very familiar to me from also working in the House of Commons for many years. The disaggregation questions that we've had, the human rights questions, they're all about cutting the data in different ways. And when I talk to my friends in the biosciences or in climate and weather modelling, these kinds of questions we're talking about are computationally quite trivial now. But somehow in the social domain and the economic domain, we make them very hard. And I think partly it's because of what Enrico was saying. We're stuck in a 20th century paradigm that thinks that data are scarce, so you have to do really fancy things with it. But if we free ourselves from that and think of the way you might do in medicine, obviously all of these things are things you can connect.
Fantastic point. Thank you. Klaus?
I will be shameless and excuse myself. There's a panel right after this on integrating data from different sources to count the most vulnerable, looking at modeling techniques for exactly this. I don't think we've gone anywhere near far enough on this, but it's a little bit of a sample of what's out there. So with that, I will encourage you to join us, but I will...
Great. I see Shida coming down the stairs, so we're going to conclude in about 2 minutes. Patricia and Tony, and then I see Musharraf, and I'm not sure whether Haishan was putting her hand up or not, but we'll start with Patricia and then Tony.
Okay. The asset test would be that the SDGs would have been implemented with the inclusion of older people. We'd have improved statistical systems to enable us to see how older people have fared. The milestone will be that by 2019, the next forum, we would actually have a city group operating under the UN statistical system, dealing with some of these issues in relation to standardization and norms and how we think about aging, the extent to which we measure realities as opposed to perceptions and constructs. Thank you.
I like a well-prepared speaker, I have to say. Thank you. Tony.
I'd like to pick up on Tony Coleman's point. I agree it's essential that politicians are at the next World Data Forum and engage. One of my little catchphrases is that statistics are too important to be left to statisticians alone. We all have to engage with statistics. The challenge, which I think Enrico rightly pointed to, is that statisticians here in the room can change the world for the P20 through the work they do. There's an enormous opportunity there, and that will only happen if we bring together the statistical community and the rest of the world to change the world.
Thank you very much. Anybody else with a hand up? I can see Sophia and then Haishan. Yeah, and Musharraf. Okay, really quick, guys. Sophia? Sorry.
Very, very quickly on the surveys question, definitely surveys have to be rethought and they have to be strengthened, but not only that, they have to be complemented. Just to put an example that for us is the obvious one, household surveys collect data on children, is one of the main sources for data on children. But what about the children that don't live in a household? So surveys is about the strengthening, but also complementing and coming up with new sources. The milestone for me and what I would like to see in World Data Forum 2019 is that governments can come and say, pilot governments can come and say, data, we were able to be brave, put innovative methodologies, and data allowed us not only to measure progress on the policies we put in place to achieve the SDGs, but data allowed our governments and our politicians and our parliamentarians to see realities that they didn't see, that they can come and say, we were able to put data at the service of the most vulnerable.
Thank you. Musharraf and then Haishan will have the last word.
Okay. I don't see many disabled people in this room. I have three key messages. Like my fellow people with disabilities, be counted as a person with disability and get benefit of SDGs. SDG is for all. 2, my humble urge to statisticians, because this forum is for data, please count us. Unless we are counted, we cannot claim our rights. In the data revolution, we want every person with disability in any community will be counted. And 3, even the General Assembly adopted 2030 agenda in 2015 that recognized persons with disabilities. But the UN SDG report in 2016 does not have any data on disability. We feared that once again we are going to be ignored as it happened with MDGs. So I strongly recommend the new Secretary General to form an expert group for advice by the representative of those who are left behind. Thank you.
Haishan.
Taking the note on the comment of financial access and survey, etc., I want to emphasize the points I made earlier. Conventional approach will still have a role to play, but improving data really requires to look beyond investing in data production itself, but linking up to other initiatives. For example, the World Bank is supporting improvement of CRVS is to really give everyone the chance to establish their own identity, but also linked to the digital identification, legal identification initiative, which allow people to have the means to be able to access financial services and so on and so forth and broaden their opportunities. But we will need to ensure that those initiative development processes will have explicit data outcome as a explicit result of that. And in the process, we also need to influence what kind of basic standard will be built into that. So those processes will yield the kind of information that complement those traditional approach and give us richer and more actionable and dynamic data that we will need to use.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for focusing. I think we've fulfilled Ambassador Wu Hongbo's imprecation to focus. Thank you very much for focusing. Thank you for an extremely interesting and diverse and productive discussion. And let's think about what is the acid test? What are we going to do next? What are we going to do when we get back home in terms of furthering this agenda of counting people to make people count? Thank you very much indeed for your participation. Thank you.